The Black Legend, just to give it some context, could be defined as exaggerating the negative, sometimes even making up things that never happened, but to make it seem like it was especially evil. And of course, ignoring or downplaying the positive. What I can tell you is that it's peculiar. How has that phenomenon targeted the Spanish Empire? And so one of the questions I ask myself is, okay, but why?
I've been looking for a debate with one of our distinguished Hispanists for a long time, and I've also been searching for someone who defends the indigenous side. I can't find that myself. It was a strong indication that truly within the academic world, that way of understanding things isn't very widespread. Because it's a lie.
In a university history department, whichever one in a random European country, no one defends the Black Legend, but in Hollywood, not defending the Black Legend could cost you your job. Breaking Bad has something that's incredible. It's set on the border between New Mexico and Mexico. Well, man, in New Mexico, it's normal, you see the desert and it's normal, but when they cross into Mexico, everything is dusty, there's an orange filter and all that to give you the feeling that it's super poor. But they show you that because in some way, it reinforces the idea that Mexico is clearly an inferior country. An actor or a director who publicly says what you and I are saying could end up having a problem with their career.
Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of LA Factoria. It's October, we're focusing on the topic of Hispanic heritage. And today we have Diego Ponga, creator and thinker behind a video game called Plus Ultra, a game that, as he will tell us next, highlights the achievements of Hispanic heritage. How are you, Diego? How are you doing? Welcome.
How are you, Jota? Thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem, man. Honestly, the pleasure is mine. This project specifically really excites me. When they mentioned it to me, I said it deserves its own show. Because anything that contributes a little to the culture war in any field is welcome. Tell me, what is the video game and what led you to come up with the idea?
Well, first of all, Plus Ultra Legado, which is the name of the game, is a video game that will be available on Steam and on Nintendo Switch. Okay, it's about the conquest of Mexico, correct? Basically, let's say the type of game it is a two-dimensional platformer. It's about jumping from left to right, but mixed with exploration, mixed with adventure as well. Also, it fits very well with the theme. Because if you think about it, the fun part of this kind of game is getting into an unknown world, not knowing what's going to be there, making your own map in your head. And if you think about it, that's exactly what a Spanish explorer could have felt when arriving in the new world, right? Because nothing was mapped, you didn't know what animals you were going to find, you didn't know what civilizations you were going to encounter, right? So, somehow that quickly fit with the original idea. If I tell you the first time I sat down to write about a video game called Plus Ultra, which is set in something related to the Spanish Empire, I was 16 years old. Okay, now I'm 33, so a lot of time has passed. What happened is that a few years ago, I decided to quit my job and start a video game company. And with an idea, and when I'm thinking about the idea, I bring back that idea I had when I was a kid, and I say, okay, now, with what I know, with the work experience I have, with everything I've been through and all that, how would I do it now? Right away, I started thinking about it and said, okay, let's go for a comic style. Let's go for, Well, let's focus it on the conquest of Mexico and specifically on giving a lot of visibility to the Tlaxcaltecas. Not to give a somewhat cheesy view between Cortes and Malintzin, but to make it closer to the real story, right? In the end, I think that's what an important part of today's audience is asking for, and surely your audience as well, right? So let's say the idea is kind of like a snowball, right? It immediately starts growing very quickly, and I keep dedicating myself to it. I'm still working at the company I was at, but I spend all my free time reading about the conquest of Mexico and building a team.
Which books did you read about the conquest of Mexico to inspire you to write the story of Plus Ultra Legado? Specifically?
Well, look, several. The ones I would recommend the most are The Conquest of Mexico by Ivan Vélez. That one is very easy to read, very short, but everything that happened is explained really well. It's really good. Then there's another one, much denser, which is more like a reference book, a bit to read by chapters. It's The True History of the Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who was actually there during the conquest, right? And that book, let's say, is the main primary source, which really any researcher who works on this part of history has to use as a reference, right? Then, from there, well, you start gathering information and other things, you keep going. For example, I remember a book called Win or Die, which is the story of the conquest. But from a strictly military perspective, meaning what weapons they used, what armor they wore, what combat techniques they used, what strategies, not only of the Spaniards, but also of the different indigenous peoples who took part, right? So, that also gives you, let's say, a much more complete picture, right? I mean, you no longer just see a snapshot, you see the whole movie of what happened, right? So, in some way, that's what helps me. For Vail, well, now let's say the exercise, which is a bit complex, is okay. Now we need to turn this into a video game format, right? And specifically into this type of game format. So, is that really what this project is about?
Damn, well, man, to start with, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Man, are you coming?
Specifically, 20 years late. I would have loved to have it when I was 10 years old and could still spend some time on video games. But I think it's an extremely positive initiative because I believe that every time something from the history of Spain has been reflected, in modern culture, it's always been with negative overtones. Those negative overtones that always reflect our history, our culture, our past. To, in a certain sense, make us feel ashamed. Was that what led you perhaps to create this video game?
Yes, totally. I mean, let's see. Nestor, you're talking about the Black Legend, right? Exactly, the Black Legend. So, just to put it in context a bit, we could define it as exaggerating the bad, exaggerating the negative. Sometimes even making up things that never happened just to make it seem especially evil, and of course ignoring or downplaying the positive. This is something, moreover, that is not exclusive to the history of Spain. I mean, this happens with any reasonably important country or any reasonably important geopolitical actor. It has been done and is still done today. It's still done today with many countries, right? Even today we have this. We are very influenced by social networks, and if you think about it, by black legends against certain countries, certain ideologies, and so on. I mean, this is, or religions as well, right? This is something I want to say. It's not something new, nor is it something that started and ended with the Spanish Empire. What I would say is that it's particular how that phenomenon has targeted the Spanish Empire. I mean, the Spanish Empire. I think it has suffered much more from the Black Legend than other types of empires or other types of political societies. And that's something, and I think that's evident. And so one of the questions I asked myself is, okay, and why not? I mean, that's the first thing you say, right? Okay, yes.
What was your conclusion? I have a theory on why the Black Legend became so widespread.
Well, I would say that, like everything, there isn't a single explanation or just one factor. I would say there's an important factor for me. Many countries have built their identity in opposition to the Spanish Empire. I mean, if you think about it.
Yeah.
For example, of course, in Latin America, it's very clear, right? In Portugal, it's very clear. I mean, Portugal breaks away from the Spanish crown, right? And let's say its reason for being is having broken away from the Spanish crown. The same with Holland, if you think about it. England and the Anglo-Saxon countries base their identity on having confronted the Spanish Empire, just like France. Italy bases part of its identity on having unified the country at the expense of Naples and Sicily, which was Spain for much longer than it has currently been Italy. So I do think there's an important point to be made there. That is, there's a large part of the world, especially around us, that has built its identity in opposition to the Spanish Empire and by extension to Hispanidad. And I would even dare to say that to a large extent, it's also in opposition to the Catholic Church. That is, the Black Legend against Catholicism and the Black Legend against the Spanish Empire are two phenomena that go quite hand in hand, hand in hand. Yes, exactly. Very important. Totally, right? That's also interesting. Because if you notice, when someone in a country that has nothing to do with the Spanish Empire criticizes the Catholic Church, the Spanish Inquisition immediately comes up.
Yes.
That is, as you can see, those two phenomena are constantly intertwined. So that's also interesting. So, of course, it's also important to confront it. I mean, I'm not here to be the one who destroys the Black Legend, you know, because obviously that's not the responsibility of just one person. But I did say, okay, somehow we have to counter this, we have to fight it, right? Because we can't just let it go. I mean, I think we've had a bit of a careless attitude, or even in some ways, a defeatist one. Oh, well, yeah, Hollywood criticizes us a lot, so it's like, oh, what a bummer, right? That's just how life is.
I do want to add something. Everything you've said, I agree with every word 100%. But I think the Black Legend has been so successful because we Hispanics ourselves have made it our own. We've accepted it ourselves. So, it's one thing to be slandered from the outside, but it's another when the country itself adopts ideas that basically make you feel ashamed of yourself.
Yes, yes, yes.
That happens. Many countries have black legends, but generally not. The countries themselves still have a certain national pride in their history. You can say whatever you want to the French, but Napoleon is Napoleon. They respect his historical figure. They all jump en masse to criticize Ridley Scott for the mess he made with the movie. On the other hand, here in Spain, it's like, no, yes, we have to apologize. Don't we have a part of Spanish society that has accepted all those lies that our geopolitical enemies have spread about us? And that, yes, makes us weak. That's my point of view.
Of course, I totally agree again, but I would also clarify something else, and that's the why not. Going back to the same thing, an explanation that's often given and doesn't convince me at all is like, why? Well, we're kind of dumb, right? We believed it because we were defeated and weak. That's just how we are. I'd say I don't think it's that, or that the French are fundamentally different or anything like that. That phenomenon does happen, but I believe it's because of France. The history of France has had an elite that has defended until recently, but has it really been that way? Its sovereignty? I have my doubts that they are still defending it or that they are selling it off cheaply. But for us, it's been a long time since our elites decided not to fight that battle.
The Francophiles, for example. Now that's where we get into a really interesting topic. So, to get back a bit to the topic of the game and everything, tell us a little about the story of the game. What is it about?
Let me tell you, the story, or rather the theme and setting, is about the conquest of Mexico. But as for the plot of the game itself, well, the protagonist is a fictional character named Don Juan, who is a Spanish halberdier. He gets shipwrecked at a key moment in the history of the conquest, which is when the men of Pánfilo de Narváez leave Cuba to stop Hernán Cortés. A lot of people don't know this, and the game plays with that, right? I mean, people don't know that the Spanish fought among themselves on the coast of Mexico, precisely because of the supporters of Cortés and the supporters of Pánfilo de Narváez. What was Narváez defending? Narváez was simply someone sent by the crown to stop Hernán Cortés. It was considered that Hernán Cortés had disobeyed an order from a superior and had suddenly started founding cities, establishing international agreements with indigenous populations that nobody knew anything about, and nobody could speak their languages or anything like that. So there comes a point when they decide to put a stop to that. So they send troops to stop Hernán Cortés. What happens is that these troops come in like a bull in a china shop. I mean, they start destroying pretty much everything. So what happens then? We put Don Juan, our protagonist, in there, whose initial mission is to stop Hernán Cortés. So if you notice, this works really well for us. About what you were talking about, the metaphor, the black legend, I mean, the first part of the game, what you're going to hear is that Cortés is a traitor. Cortés is a kind of rebel. Cortés is a madman who wants to come here and conquer an unknown empire, and so on. As you go deeper, you start to discover, isn't it that these Spaniards sent by the crown are just newcomers? They mess everything up, mistreat the indigenous people, but it turns out that the indigenous people see Cortés as a hero, you know? And that makes the main character change his perspective, you know? That's where the black legend falls apart for you, and then you meet Cortés, and that's when you switch sides, you help Cortés, you defeat Pánfilo de Narváez. And that's where the story starts to, let's say, delve into how Don Juan, his life is going to intertwine with the historical figures and the historical events of the conquest of Mexico.
That's incredible. I love it, man.
Thank you very much.
I'm gonna play it, man. I don't have a Nintendo, but I want to see it. That's worth it since I'm passionate about history. These days, Pánfilo is often used as an insult.
Yes, exactly.
Huh? Why? Because he tried to stop Cortés. Now then, with this whole video game and everything, have you had any trouble financing it? Has there been any problem executing it? Because generally I feel that there are certain forces that don't want Spaniards to have historical pride in the incredible feat they accomplished.
Alright, let me tell you. Financing a project, man, what can I tell you, right? I mean, you know it better than I do. It's not easy to finance a project.
No.
It's not easy to do. You have to knock on a lot of doors, and many doors are closed from the start. A lot of doors. It seems like you waste a lot of time, and in the end, you don't. That always happens, okay? I mean, this is the daily bread in the life of raising funds for a project. But well, at first we got a couple of investors who gave us a good hand to get started, and things started to grow a bit. The truth is, we've successfully launched the game. Regarding what you were saying, besides, of course, this is a topic that, let's say, could ruffle some feathers, so to speak. Look, when we started making the game, I'll admit it, I was a bit scared, like, damn, people here are going to get upset. I mean, this is going to be something that starts to ruffle feathers. When the first trailers, videos, and comments appear, we might face a crisis if controversy erupts and we're unsure how to respond. Maybe we'd even have to shut down the project. That could have happened, right? But man, I think in the last 3 years, people's mindset has changed, largely thanks to podcasts like yours. That phenomenon hasn't even happened. In fact, I'll tell you something.
It's been the opposite, right?
Of course. In fact, look, there was excitement. Look, let me tell you something. Something happened to us, okay? Once, which is good, we met with a video game company with the idea that maybe they would finance us, and so on. And well, the person was, let's put it this way, very woke. Okay, not for any particular reason, but you could tell, right? And I thought, okay, this might be a problem. So suddenly I explain a bit about what the game is about and so on, and they say, okay, that sounds good, but I have a question. Why did you choose that title? And of course, me plus Ultra, I thought, okay, they're going to try to accuse me of being a fascist or something. So I explained it a bit like, well, it's the motto of the Spanish Empire. And it was like that, to go further, right? Like, you know, the usual, right? The non plus ultra, the Mediterranean, I mean, the straight, that's what it was about. You can't go any further, and precisely the Spanish proved that you can go further. So, is that why it ended up becoming our motto and all that? And this person says to me, oh, that's interesting, but why do you use a Japanese motto? And me? Like, what do you mean? Plus ultra is Latin, obviously. I mean, it's Latin, right? But she tells me no because it's from an anime, isn't it? Yes, there's an anime where the main character has the plus ultra power, but I'm not sure what the secret power is. I mean, okay, yeah, but what surprised me, and this has happened to me more than once, you know? It's not the first time that someone would associate plus ultra with something anonymous. The first time, of course. This is my first time experiencing this, but it's happened 2 or 3 more times with foreigners than with Spaniards. You know why? The level has already been so destructive in European societies that people no longer recognize that plus ultra is a Latin motto. They don't even know that a Spanish Empire existed. They don't even consider it. I mean, they don't care. Everything that happened before 1990 seems super ancient to them.
I would say before 1933.
Well, yes. Okay, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, there's like an ignorance, but an ignorance that in a way means these people are also victims, right? Of that destruction. Yes, they should be blamed, of course. I mean, people aren't at fault for not knowing these kinds of things, but in any case, they are to blame. We're going back to the same thing a bit. The elites who have allowed or promoted that, depending on the case, right? And of course, that also makes you realize that those who could be the angriest about this discourse really don't know what you're talking about.
That's the thing.
They have no idea what you're talking about.
The thing is, look, I'm going to tell you a little something. I've been looking for a debate with one of our beloved distinguished Hispanist professor for a long time. I've been searching for someone who supports the indigenous view, the black legend, using historical arguments. The idea that the only thing the Spaniards did there was commit outrages, abuses, and looting. I can't find anyone. I mean, no one has even been willing. That to me was a strong indication that this way of understanding things really isn't very widespread within the academic world. Because it's a lie, it's false. Then there are some people who are more self-critical and some who are less. But the black legend per se, that worldview that the only thing the Spaniards did was harm, loot gold and so on, is only defended by ignorant people.
Thank you. Yes, I would say that earlier you asked me about my conclusions on the topic of the black legend and so on. One of the conclusions I've drawn, tying in a bit with what you were saying, is that the black legend is not so much a historiographical phenomenon as it is a communicative phenomenon.
Propagandistic, I would call it clearly.
That is, the black legend is not so much a matter of history books, I mean history books that have promoted that kind of view. There have been and still are, but it's not a very common thing. Nearly all historians specializing in this period from anywhere in the world agree those are just propaganda and shouldn't be given much attention. But in terms of communication, that black legend is still there. Let me explain. In a history department at a university, any university in a random European country, no one defends the black legend. I understand what you're telling me, not because of your experience, but in Hollywood, not defending the black legend could cost you your job. You know, I mean, an actor or a director who publicly says what you and I are saying could have a problem with their career. You know what I mean? Why? Why is that? And we're coming back a bit to another idea you brought up, which was the geopolitical topic. Geopolitical. You can't explain the cultural superiority or hegemony of the United States without Hollywood. I mean, the United States has a lot of military, financial, territorial, and all kinds of power, diplomatic, whatever you want, of course, but it also has communicative power and a lot of it. The main social networks we use are American. Practically all the movies we watch are American. The music we listen to is American. Even reggaeton, which is popular in Spain, is often made in Puerto Rico. I mean, in the end, we have to understand that too. It's a phenomenon, it's logical, they're the empire of the moment, and they try to extend their power however they can. That is to say, in that sense, I don't analyze it, I don't criticize it. So, of course, you have to realize that if you analyze it, not from a historiographical perspective, but from a communicative perspective. There you say, of course, there are actually a ton of movies and series that suddenly use stereotypes against Hispanics, against Spaniards, against Mexicans, for example. There's a case, for me, it's the one I like the most. It's so obvious. Dude, have you seen Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
Breaking Bad has something that's amazing. It's set on the border between New Mexico and Mexico. New Mexico is in the United States, and then there's Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's one of my favorite series. Awesome.
Of course, I love it. Well, man, in New Mexico, I mean, it's normal. It's the desert, and it's normal, but when they cross into Mexico, everything is dusty. Orange filter. And it's like to give you the feeling that it's super poor, and it's like, man, it's the same desert. There's a border, but the border doesn't show up there. I mean, the border doesn't create yellow dust, you know? But they put that there because somehow it reinforces the idea that Mexico is clearly an inferior country, you know? Even in the most subtle things like the use of color, you can already sense it. Then there are much more extreme cases. I mean, well, I don't know if you've seen the Aztec Batman thing. I don't know if you've seen...
No, I haven't seen that. What are you saying?
Aztec Batman? Yeah. They're going to make a movie. Well, it comes out on September 19th. I don't know if this podcast will have aired yet, of course. I mean, if the movie will have already premiered by the time this podcast airs. But anyway.
Aztec Batman?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already at the box office. I mean, but are you talking about a movie? Box office?
No. They're not releasing it on Netflix. Tell me it's not on Amazon Prime. But anyway, it's interesting because...
And damn, is Batman Azteca going...
Well, that Cortez is a bloodthirsty guy who goes around killing indigenous people and is two-faced and all that. I haven't seen this either because it hasn't been released yet at the time we're talking.
The trailer already shows the Aztec as the people's defender.
Of course. And above all, because that's also something we tried to address in the game. The thing is, not all the Aztecs agreed either, you know? I mean, there's something really interesting when you start reading about this, and it's that Moctezuma, who is the emperor of the Mexica... Okay, Aztecs and Mexica are the same thing. Moctezuma gets along really well with Cortez. He gets along super well with Cortez. Moctezuma even swears allegiance to Charles Tefe. Cortez and Moctezuma never actually meet on the battlefield. Things remain peaceful. That's very interesting because, of course, and well, when Moctezuma dies, who is killed by stones thrown by his own people, which shows you that the Mexica themselves, many of them did not agree with each other, but there were also their own internal tensions, their own factions that started taking sides. Some, my theory is, some take advantage of Moctezuma's weakness when the Spaniards arrive to strike a blow. A coup d'etat, killing the emperor and putting another in his place, well, of course, something very interesting happens there, and that's Moctezuma. On his deathbed, he asked Cortez to take care of his children. Because an Aztec tradition is that when there's a coup d'etat, the emperor is killed. The Huayla, which is what they called him. Killing the emperor means more than just ending his life.
The emperor and the whole family?
The whole family. Naturally, you don't want an heir appearing later to kill you. So, of course, when Moctezuma is struck by that stone and realizes he's on his deathbed, he asks Cortes to take care of his children, and Cortes does take care of his children. That indigenous nobility is then acknowledged. And it's very interesting because this is at the beginning of the 16th century, but in the 18th century, in Madrid, the royal palace is built in the Plaza de Oriente and a statue of Moctezuma is placed in a prominent spot. There's nothing hidden about it, right? No? At the entrance of the palace, there's a very large statue of Moctezuma and another of Atahualpa, that is, Moctezuma and Atahualpa. In the Spanish Empire, they were considered great kings of Spain. That's something that, of course, no other European empire has done.
There's no comparison.
I mean, just so we get an idea, let me explain. Can you imagine if Americans put something like that in the United States Senate or the White House? I don't even know what to tell you, man. It's just not
Comparable.
a statue of Saddam Hussein? That would be unthinkable, right?
Wouldn't it rather be a statue of the Native Americans whom they systematically exterminated? In fact,
Of course.
at the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century, several presidents of the United States used to say, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian," which was completely different from what was happening within the Spanish Empire. In fact, all of what is now the United States, the Western United States, was Spanish when the Mexicans lost it after independence. Well, it was the viceroyalty of New Spain. And truly, there's a very curious paradox. All the Indians who lived in that territory, who were later systematically annihilated because of the Anglo-Saxon Protestant system, a topic people don't want to talk about.
Yes, religion is very important.
They always remembered that with the Spaniards they played cards, were integrated and were allowed to live. Even those who didn't want to be Catholic, despite claims that evangelization was forced. People don't realize how significant Spain's actions were.
Of course.
Look,
That's why it's very interesting. Of course, what's happening here is that we've opened another can of worms, which is the religious can of worms. People today don't really understand this because we are also children of our time and in our time. In Europe, societies are very secularized, which doesn't mean they don't have religion. Let me explain. Nowadays, the majority religion in Spain is nihilism. This may be a personal opinion, but I believe you can't live without religion, not necessarily Christianity, Islam, or any specific faith. Rather, religion is essential to every society. I mean, it's like just as every society has to have inhabitants, because otherwise it wouldn't be a society. It has to have a series of elements, let's say, an anthropological vision and a moral framework that gives cohesion to society. That's what we call religion. The word comes from religare, meaning to bind or unite society. So, what can you say, for example, about the United States, where they have an enormous plurality of Protestant churches? Actually, what really binds society together deep down is the belief that everything can be solved with freedom and democracy. You can criticize it, you may think it's good, bad, or just okay, but I would say that's a very religious approach. Religious doesn't necessarily mean believing that something transcendental exists. But notice that, for example, you, who have criticized Guauquismo a lot, one of the central points of Guauquismo in the last 3 or 4 years has been that you can be born in the wrong body, which means that you exist before being born into a body. That's the pre-existence of the soul. It's a religious concept, you know? So I go back to the same thing, believing that we've overcome religions and that there are no more religions or something like that. I think that's something very typical of our time, but that doesn't make it true. Now, going back a bit to the era we were talking about, the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, there's a very important point here, and that's the Lutheran Schism. And then the whole Protestant Reformation and everything that will encompass the Catholic Church. In fact, Catholic means universal. It has a very important point, which is considering that since all men are children of God and there is no difference by race, the term race itself and the way it has been used came later and mainly from Protestant countries or countries with a strong Protestant influence that had never existed in the Catholic world. The goal was always integrating peoples. In fact, Rome, the Roman Empire, which is where Catholicism draws directly from Greece and Rome, was precisely about the integration of peoples from completely different cultures. Of course, so what did the Romans do? There were many pagan religions and so on. Yes, but they basically unified a common pantheon across the Mediterranean and merged it into the emperor cult. That's why the religion, let's say, from the definition I gave you before, that common religion in the Mediterranean was the cult of the Roman emperor. Those who challenge that are the Christians, and that's why they were sent to the lions until finally the empire converts. When the empire converts, there has already been that great change. Let's say it's not homogenization. The word I'm looking for is, let's say, more like cohesion of the whole society around a set of values. Christianity's arrival consolidates it even further, right? So what happens with those men? Also keep in mind that we're in the middle of the Renaissance, meaning people are recovering those ideas. Those very empires are recovering them. People in the intellectual elites are constantly talking about Greece and Rome. I mean, those ideas are always there, right? So, what happens? When Cortés arrives in Mexico, he sees himself as Alexander the Great. And this isn't a joke. I mean, he himself starts to imitate Alexander the Great. If you look at what Alexander the Great did, Alexander the Great, he married his generals to the princesses of the lands he conquered, to a Persian princess, to a Median princess, and so on. That's what Cortés does. He marries his men to a Totonac princess, to a Tlaxcalan princess, to a Mexica princess. Why? Because it's the way to integrate.
He burned the ships too, like Alexander the Great.
Well, here we have to say that what he actually does is dismantle the ships. He doesn't burn them.
Well,
Alejandro burned them. That part has been somewhat romanticized.
but look, even in that there's similarity.
Of course, so is that it? He marries his men to his princesses. He himself has this idea that what needs to be done is to replicate Spain. That is, he himself is the one who gives the name to what we now call Mexico. He names it New Spain because he has the idea of replicating Spain there, of making a new Spain. Many people say Spain didn't exist then, but why did Cortés call it New Spain? That was brilliant. I can't see the future, so this is important too, right? So, he, in some way, considers himself the heir to a millennia-old Greco-Latin legacy on one hand and a Catholic Christian one on the other. And he has to integrate the peoples. How do you integrate the peoples? With two things, which are the first, law, Roman law, and second, baptism, that is, becoming part of the same religious community.
And what about mestizaje?
Mestizaje is also another essential point, and mestizaje existed before Cortés, and I'll tell you why. In Queen Isabella, the Catholic's own will, mestizaje is already mentioned. Queen Isabella, the Catholic, already says, marry each other. Spaniards with indigenous women and indigenous men with Spanish women, that's stated very clearly by Isabella the Catholic. And notice that Isabella the Catholic died long before the conquest of Mexico, Spain. At that time, Spain only had a couple of settlements in the Antilles. In other words, very little had arrived. But there was already the idea that people had to mix. Keep in mind also that Spain had a previous experience, which was the Reconquista. In the Reconquista, there was an issue, and that is that in Al-Andalus, there was practically no mixing. Why? Because since there were two religions, Islam and Christianity, Christians didn't marry Muslims and Muslims didn't marry Christians. There were cases, of course, but it was by no means common. What happens? Of course, because the criteria was never ethnic, racial, or biological, those categories weren't at play there. What mattered was religion, and you married people of your own religion. So, what happens when they arrive in Mexico is exactly that, right? They are baptized as part of the imposition of religion. Look, there's a lot of myth here that's also true. It's true that it was imposed, of course. Religions are imposed, and we're going to see. It's also like we were talking about before. The Roman Empire converted to Christianity. How did it convert? Well, because the emperor converted and imposed it. And what happens is that people imagine when you say the word impose, that it seems like they went around shooting people so they'd look at that crucifix. It wasn't like that. That's, let's say, the fallacy. What happens? That evangelization first brings a bunch of friars who actually learn the languages of the indigenous people. And there isn't a massive destruction of temples. Initially, because they try, let's say, not to turn the local population against them. In fact, at first there's a moment. In fact, Bernal Díaz del Castillo Cortés tells about it. And his men, when they start arriving there, they go deeper into the continent and see all those kinds of rituals, cannibalism, human sacrifices, really nasty things and all that, which honestly must have been quite something. It must have given them a bad feeling. Not a small thing, huh? Not a small thing, right? That's the first thing they instinctively say. Remember, there were large statues and idols all covered in blood. Instinctively, you think we need to get rid of this stuff, right? That's your first reaction. Friar Bartolome de Olmedo, a Mercedarian friar and religious man, is the one who stops them. The stereotype would tell us that it's the priest who's there trying to force people to believe. But it's the opposite, and why is it the opposite?
Read.
Of course, because he's the most well-read and he's the one who knows perfectly well the experience that Spain has had with Islam. And so what he says is, no, if we start destroying their temples, we're going to have the native population against us. What we need to do first is establish power here. Calm things down, pacify the area, let's say. Make sure that the power of the crown reaches here. Once we have that, we need to learn their languages as they do. In fact, you know very well that languages like Nahuatl, Quechua, Purépecha, and Aymara have written grammar. Before, languages like German or English, which now seem much more important to us than Nahuatl. They are now, but they weren't before.
People don't realize Spain's literary significance.
Of course, and that's mostly done by friars, but why is it done by friars? Because not only because obviously you have to communicate with the natives, which is already a good enough reason, but also because you have to make the natives understand that this empire has a set of foundations. Like I was telling you, integrative religion, anthropology, and morality, that in order to be part of this, you have to understand it and it has to be explained to you. And that's what is done. In fact, the consequence of that is that the indigenous people were excluded from the Inquisition tribunal. Earlier, we were talking about the myth of the Spanish Inquisition and so on, which always comes up. Well, the indigenous people were deliberately excluded because it was considered pointless. How are you going to judge a guy who is a convert who just converted? You can't judge him because obviously he's going to convert and make mistakes.
Yes, besides, speaking a bit about the Spanish Inquisition, it's one of the biggest black legends out there. What is the official record of deaths by the Inquisition in more than 2 centuries?
Look, I haven't studied this in depth, but it's true that people who know it well say it's something like that. I think it's a bit more, about 3,000 people over 3 centuries. In the entire Spanish Empire, considering that it's practically half the world, of course, or it's one of the largest empires in the history of humanity. Well, that's quite little. 100 executed per year in a time when executions were common, that's actually quite little. Keep in mind that if we're talking about 3,000 people, but let's say it was double that, let's say it was 6,000, or let's say it was 10 times more, 30,000, hey, do you know how many people died in the Protestant Reformation? How many people were persecuted by the Lutherans and Calvinists in Northern Europe? How many people were killed by the English and Scottish Calvinists? Of course, that's where we get into a numbers war. It's very hard to defend. Honestly, that's how it seems to me.
The real Inquisition came from the Protestants, who completely rebelled against the Catholic Church and started a wave of bloodshed throughout Europe. And that's something that isn't talked about today.
Of course, keep in mind, well, let's see. We go back to the same thing. As we said before, right? Societies are structured around anthropological and moral frameworks, which is what we call religion. So, if you propose an alternative anthropological and moral framework, you have the possibility of splitting society in 2 or 3, depending on how many alternatives you introduce. What is going on today in our highly unstructured societies and why? Sometimes it feels like there are too many alternatives, like anyone or you and I could start our own religion. This was once unthinkable, and in many places it still is. Why? It's seen as unacceptable because it means breaking from society, and people believe the greater good is being part of a community. What happens? Well, of course, the reform completely breaks with this, and it breaks Europe. You could argue it was already broken by the East-West schism with the Orthodox. But even then, notice that the Orthodox, though schismatic, still have...
They maintain intact ties with Rome.
Of course. That is, even though they do not recognize the Pope as the head of the church and have a church that, let's say, has gone in parallel. Despite that, the anthropological and moral framework does not change. Nothing is identical. You go to a small village in Russia and you go to a small village in Extremadura and that's it. Yes, the aesthetics and such of the temples are different, but the morality that the priest teaches on Sunday at Mass is more or less identical, right?
Yes, it's the natural sibling of the Church of Rome. It's the Orthodox Church.
Exactly, but if you go to the Protestant equivalent in the Bible Belt in the United States, you have a completely different framework, completely different...
Totally. And Protestantism has evolved to some pretty extreme points. Nowadays, anyone in the United States specifically, anyone can have a Protestant church that even supports marriage and adoption between people of the same sex, when that is strictly forbidden in the Christian Bible. I don't know, there are so many strange things like trying to be Christian but at the same time completely ignoring everything Christ says. Literally.
Yeah, sure. Let's see, it's just not...
We're making a value judgment?
No.
We're not saying it's very clear.
I'm going to give you a strictly rational analysis, and yes, an analytical one.
It's not exactly analytical.
Look at what I was telling you. If you have the ability to create a new anthropological and moral framework to modify society to your political, economic, and financial interests, you're going to be very, 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 very interested in controlling religion, so that's why the great powers have always tried to control religious powers, right? To a large extent. In fact, you could say that wokeism has been an attempt to impose, not a completely new religion. I would say that today, in 2025, knock on wood. It's a bit on the decline, but 2 years ago we didn't think it was on the decline, just 2 years ago, right? So maybe in 2 years, let's see where we are, totally.
It's really on the decline. Yeah, I mean...
This also shows you how quickly these things move, that we think they never will. Society changes its mind and changes at an astonishing speed. I mean, sometimes it can go 2,000 years without changing its ideas, and then in 2 weeks it changes completely. I mean, what I want to say is, we hold ourselves in very high regard as societies, but then we're very easily manipulated, right? And for example, in the United States, something happens and it's... Many Protestant churches, especially small ones, are not non-profit organizations. They actually operate as LLCs, so they can be bought and sold. Many times, they're bought, I'll say politely, by people who aren't Christian.
Yes, it's really scary. Everything that happens there with religion.
So forgive me for interrupting you, but you have to realize that many of those views that we could call heretical, meaning far from what that religion truly teaches, there could be an ulterior motive behind it, which is to lead society or certain sectors of society into a corner, because there is someone who is completely interested in that.
Going back to the game?
Tell me.
Going back to the game? We were talking about the problems you had getting the funding to carry out the project, but in the end it worked out.
That's right.
Share the story of launching this project. When will the game release?
Well, look, I'll tell you more or less, like I said before, I spent my free time reading, putting together a team, and looking for funding. Finally, I found a little something, and by the end of 2021 in December, we really got serious about working on this, right? So it's been a little over 3 years, hasn't it? In 2022, we're working on something, let's say, I could tell you how it's going. Production. I mean, we're already producing the game, but above all, we're thinking about what the game's map will be like, what the game's artistic style will be like, and that's when things start to come up. We had decided it would be comic style, but there are many comic styles, right? I mean, you can go from manga to Mortadelo y Filemon. In the end, we went with a style similar to Tintin. Why? Because no one had done it before. We analyzed video games, and everyone, when they do comics, goes for either Marvel and Detective Comics, meaning American superheroes, or Japanese manga. No one was doing anything else, so we said, okay, what if we do European comics? So we tried to imitate the style of Tintin comics. It turned out cool, and we came up with an idea, which was that each room in the game would be a comic panel. So it would seem like instead of navigating through the world, you were navigating...
Through the comic?
Through a comic as if it were an open book. People have really liked that, right? And it's something that, like I said, came about a bit by accident and more or less by improvisation, and that's kind of how everything has been, right? If you ever interview another video game creator, you'll notice it's a common topic. No, this happened by accident. Someone just suddenly had the idea. That day we tried it, it was cool.
That's common in the video game industry.
Constantly, it's very creative in that sense. You keep experimenting to see results, sometimes good, sometimes not. Suddenly, an error appears or someone messes up and you think, wait, hold on. Let's explore this, see how it turns out, and it ends up looking good.
And then...
What happens? Then look, we had our first, let's say, public exhibition in Bilbao at a video game fair the year after we started. And of course, I had to be honest. I mean, I went to Bilbao a bit nervous because I thought, damn, in the end, we're already putting out a game about the Spanish Empire. And Bilbao is a city where, well, there are a lot of people who might feel a bit bothered because it has a strong Basque nationalist ideology that might clash with their perspective. I felt a bit nervous, like maybe, I don't know, will we have any problems or will someone say something to us or something like that? Man, no, not at all. People really liked the game. The people who came, 500 people, were able to play the game at our booth. People kept saying, this is so cool. What's this about? About the Empire? wow, the Spanish Empire, that's awesome. Oh, the conquest of Mexico, that's so cool. Then someone else would approach you and say, and also there was one day when the place where we were, the booth, was next to San Mamés and there had been a match. People would approach you wearing scarves with the Basque flag and athletic club crest saying, man, I love the tercios, I love the Spanish Empire. And I would say, damn, well, look, I came here with a certain idea, kind of, yeah.
Many people from the Basque country still follow me.
Of course. So does that make you realize something else? Like, wow. Just like I have just like I have fought against the Black Legend, against the Spanish Empire, against Spain, against the Catholic world, how many times have I believed exaggerations about people from Bilbao or about Basques in general, right? And in the end, you say, no, man. People are super friendly, they're really understanding, and they really love the game.
And you know what I think? Tell me. That until you try things like this or do them, for example, I always talk about this, and it's a personal experience that's a lot like what happened to you there in Bilbao. I prepared myself for all of Spain to hate me. Man, and honestly, I get very little hate. I actually get a lot more love and affection in this case. And what does that mean? That we have to be brave and go for it, because at the end of the day, there's a sleeping crowd. Politics makes them believe they're a minority, the media makes them believe they're a minority, the system in general makes them believe they're a minority, but we are the majority. I realize it everywhere I go and every place I visit. It's likely they have us completely divided. Because if we look around and realize that there are many of us who have that concern, that love for our country, that love for our history, at the end of the day, we will regain something precious, the pride of our roots, our sense of belonging, and where we come from. We have reasons to be proud.
Totally. I totally agree. In fact, look, something is starting to happen with the younger generations, which is, of course, our generation and our parents' generation have gradually become disconnected from, let's say, all that cultural legacy you were talking about, right? Naturally, newer generations are already quite disconnected. And interestingly, there's a phenomenon of young people trying to recover that legacy because they feel they've been deprived of it. And it's not a strictly Spanish phenomenon. It happens, I would say, in any European society, yes, and in some countries, maybe more than in others. There are countries, for example, maybe in Poland, maybe in Hungary, which are very special cases too because they've had a different history. But anyway, I do believe that this phenomenon is happening, and it's perfectly understandable that it is. And I also think there's a point where it's a reaction to Buquismo, in the sense of many people. I think that without being particularly attached to any kind of ideology or having thought about it too much, Buquismo has, that made people feel alarmed and say, man, maybe we're going too far with this, you know? I mean, maybe this whole thing about not having any kind of roots or anything is getting completely out of hand. And if we let this keep going,
the reaction is going to be very strong, even really strong. For people like us who have, let's say, conservative ideas or a way of understanding the world where we need to know where we come from and not break with everything, because at the end of the day, I think there's nothing more arrogant than the current generation that believes it has the moral authority to judge comfortably. From the 21st century, all our ancestors who crossed the sea in a small boat. Nowadays, the Palestinian flotilla with a new generation ship goes out to sea. A few drops of rain fall and they return to Barcelona because of the storm. And our ancestors crossed an unknown and unexplored sea with sails and wood.
Of course, that's a good example. Look, the perception that people in Europe and America have of their elites is not positive at all.
Isn't it?
People's perception of the elites is, first of all, that they are very fake. That's what you're saying, that they set up their little fleets and all that and just put on a show. I don't know, we go out, then we come back after half an hour, then no, now we're really going out. We stop
in Ibiza, I was going to say, we stop in Ibiza, Free Palestine, to the rhythm of techno and with a couple of drinks in us.
Of course, but that's not a unique case. If you want, it's a case, well, that now comes up a lot because it's very exaggerated. But on a smaller scale, that's been happening for a long time, and of course, people are already a bit fed up. Then, also you have this phenomenon that has been happening in our societies, in Europe and in America for many years, decades, should I say what it is? Suddenly, a political party comes along that we all think is going to be. This is the Messiah who comes to solve all the problems, but then disappointment arrives. The leader becomes part of the elite. Suddenly, a new party appears and everyone decides to vote for them, hoping they'll fix things. Now we're on our 7th or 8th try. And now people just stop believing it.
Yes, Diego, I want to ask you a question. What was the main motivation for starting this project, or what was the reason? I mean, if you had to define one reason, just one, that led you to ask for funding. Racking your brain, reading all the books, all the work it takes, I can really understand you as an entrepreneur myself, all that it takes to start a project. What motivated you to create Plus Ultra Legado?
I'll tell you two things, but they both relate to the first. Since childhood, I felt born to make video games. It's what I truly enjoy in life, it's what I really believe I'm good at, and it's what I can truly feel confident about. I know I'll do this, I'll do it well, and I'll do it no matter what. That's one side. On the other hand, at the same time, my way is that I have to use that condition I just described to you for a greater good. That is, you can't, of course, get scared and say, no, I'm never going to do it because maybe I'll fail and all that. Well, yes, that's very valid, but let's have some guts. But I'm not going to do it just because I want to. I don't know. Maybe to have a more comfortable position in society or something like that. Getting a certain salary isn't just about that. I mean, you also have to try to do some good for the society around you, right? I mean, because, hey, I could be making a game about, I don't know, a martial killer or a ninja game or something like that. Why do I do this? Largely because I also think it's a good idea to change people's perspective through a new form of communication, like video games. I mean, I think we Hispanics have missed the train when it comes to cinema. For better or worse, that train has passed and we've missed it. Man, let's try to catch the video game train on time.
I don't think I agree with you, huh? We can do it. We can make it in cinema too,
No, we can't do it.
but through it. Imagine one.
But what happens is that we arrive too late. That's it.
No.
No, you don't think so?
No.
No?
I don't agree with you there, and I'll explain why.
Okay.
A blockbuster that an entrepreneur, someone who's doing well, in fact, I'll tell you, it's one of my projects.
Okay. Are you here declassifying info?
I want to be a screenwriter for series and movies.
That's cool, man.
My goal is to make as much money as possible and eventually leave Spain, since it's impossible here. They just keep screwing you over. And one of my passions has been creating series, creating characters. I even started a project to write a novel when I was 14, a medieval novel. Crazy, right? I found The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson very inspiring. And I don't agree with you that we missed the train when it comes to cinema. What happens is that there's no private initiative. Spanish cinema is subsidized by the state. Is it complicated for this kind of cultural war to come from there, whether on the big screen or the small one, through series? But believe me, with all the boom that's happening, damn, the story they've told me doesn't add up. This whole Black Legend thing doesn't make sense to me. Damn, but look at the cathedrals. Damn, but look at the roads. Damn, but these people, how is it possible? But if I speak Spanish, if my name is Fernando, hating Spanish speakers, hating Hispanic heritage is hating yourself. And a lot of people are realizing this. Zunzunegui in Mexico, Marcelo Gulo in Argentina, Cesar Perez Guevara in Venezuela. A lot of Hispanists are emerging. Why? Because the story doesn't make sense. I think the time will come when we will conquer movies and television series as well. And if everything goes well, and above all, if God wills it. I will be there because it's one of my very long-term projects. I have to tell you, this is not short or medium term.
I think it's great, huh? I really think it's great. What I was saying is, okay, the thing is, if you want to get us into the world of movies, movies today are clearer and more standardized. Video games, however, offer more variety and opportunities, almost like a gold mine.
That's true.
So that was kind of my point, right? Like, okay, with movies, it's already like fighting a seven-headed hydra, you know? But in video games, there's still a lot of innovation. We can still dig in and get involved in time, you know? It's kind of like running to see if I can catch the subway car at the last second.
And I'll tell you something, I really appreciate that you did it.
Thank you very much.
Honestly, you really have to be on all fronts. You're right, looking at it from that perspective, that for cinema, it's a tough fight, and above all, you have to fight with a lot.
Yes, of course.
You have to put in a lot.
That's an important point.
A lot. I don't know how much the game cost, I don't know, but I guarantee you it wasn't cheap. I think making a series set in those times with a good script and everything is very expensive.
Yeah.
It's very expensive. And man, another question I'm going to ask you.
Man, tell me.
Okay? I love the reasons you've given me for why you started the game. What level of personal satisfaction have you had with this project once it's finished? When does it come out?
That's a good question, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer right now. What I can tell you is, if I think back to 3 years ago when I was just starting with all this and so on, I think about how I was just a kid. I mean, really, I think about what I've learned, how much I've matured, I feel a bit like I've come back from war, just with that. I think it's already been very, very, very enlightening for me personally. The second thing, well, it's kind of the dream of my life. I've already told you, it's the first time I wrote about a game like this. I was 16 years old. Has it been done? Has it been possible to do it? How many people and how much inner voice, right? How much? Pepito Grillo was telling you it's not going to work out, not a chance, give up, abandon it, run away, find yourself a secure job, even if it's worse paid or whatever, or even if you can't stand your boss, whatever it is. But run away, because you're not going to make it. Run away because this isn't going to work out. Run away because maybe you have to make a decision you don't want to make. And so that voice, if you're an entrepreneur, boom, 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 you're always going to have it there. Despite everything, we've done it. Let me add one more thing. You mentioned my satisfaction, man. My satisfaction isn't just mine. This game, deep down, is a collective project. There are a lot of us. We're Pontica, the company, and sure, I'm the director and producer of the game, but we have a team of people who made it possible. And I also think it's only fair to acknowledge their work because they've worked really hard to make it happen. Because this is interesting too, even though right now it might seem like it's a very personal project, mine. It has also become the dream of their lives, which is to release a video game. Not everyone can say that, right? So that's already beyond, I'm telling you, beyond the economic benefit, beyond whether there are really people who play it and change their perspective, and so on. And they say, well, hey, the Black Legend is nonsense beyond that part, which obviously needs to be weighed up, right? The personal satisfaction, I'm telling you, and for the team, it's an incredible joy.
Questions are now shorter and more precise. I'm really interested. You said you showed it in Bilbao, letting people play, and they enjoyed it.
Yes, quite a lot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You can only use one character?
There are some moments when you switch characters, yeah.
But can you use Hernan Cortés at any point?
No way, man. No, actually, no, because we also try to make sure you don't control a historical character. The historical characters. Let's say their behavior is fixed, but the behavior you would have in that era, that's what you choose, right? That's a very powerful thing about video games.
You have options to choose from.
No, you can't choose. You can't change the course of history, but let's say in every video game. In the end, of course, it's not like in a movie, a series, or a novel. You see a guy saving the world in a video game, you save the world, That's already a big difference when it comes to building a character. I'm a big supporter of historical characters not being playable and the playable character being fictional. That's why, in fact, if you think about it, they do that a lot too. In historical novels, the protagonist is usually a fictional character, and then, of course, to, intertwine their life with different historical figures. Totally.
I want you to tell me when the game is coming out.
On October 9th.
October 9th, when we release this show, it will have already come out, actually.
So it's already in stores. To buy it, it will be available on Steam and in the Nintendo Switch digital store.
Alright, so I want you to tell me and describe what kind of experience everyone who plays and buys this game will have. I want people to buy it. I want my whole audience, if they like video games, to support this kind of project. Not just because of the quality of the game, which I haven't tried, honestly. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm going to play it. I'm going to buy it solely and exclusively because I think it's vitally important to support projects that take a stand. A vision that harms us, that hurts us, that makes us feel small, and it's the historical complex that they've instilled in our collective psyche. So, anyone who doesn't buy this game and likes video games is a betonidas, just so you know. Alright, tell me the question I asked you earlier.
Look, first of all, what I think people need to keep in mind is if you've always been thinking, damn, wouldn't it be cool if they made a movie that told the great feats of the Spanish Empire about how America worked back then? Have you always thought about this? Wouldn't it be cool if there was a movie or video game like Assassin's Creed about this? Dude, well, you have it. It's this Plus Ultra Legacy, so if you want to support it, buy it, and you'll like it too because it's a game you're really going to enjoy. Exploring the new world, facing challenges, facing nature, all those great landscapes, and of course, all the ins and outs. All the problems that existed between the different indigenous peoples, between the different Spanish factions, etc. I mean, it's also a way to understand our...
And one thing is, you can also learn history through the game. Everything in the game is 100% historical, meaning the course of history is very well documented. No, I'm not gonna make up that Tenochtitlan was made of crap.
No, of course not. I mean, we've done a lot of research, not just on the historical facts themselves. I mean, like, who the characters were, what they said, how they did things, and why, and let's say the dialogues they had with each other. But also things like how they dressed, what the art was like, what the buildings were like, what, let's say, Tenochtitlan was like at that time, what Tlaxcala was like, in some way too, because look, despite the importance of that time, and that all of us, more or less, have some image of the conquest of Mexico in our minds, there aren't any major films or big audiovisual productions that have portrayed us. If you think about World War II or the Roman Empire, we have a lot of images in our heads, but not so much about all this. It's harder for us. So we've also wanted in some way to rely heavily on history in order to make the most accurate recreation possible. Is everything truly 100% historical, as you said? That depends on how we define 100% historical. No, nothing as absurd as you mentioned. For example, a Spanish halberdier in armor wouldn't jump 4 times his height, but Macho is a platform game, so it needs that or it would be boring.
Look, man, but Troncoso is obvious.
That's why not, but that's what I'm saying. It's always there. We'll take a few small liberties, but it's not historical manipulation. But if you're asking if there are things that...
Do you think the indigenous faction will be offended? Are you doing justice to the importance of the indigenous people in the conquest of America? Contrary to popular belief, the indigenous people were actually the conquerors. Hernán Cortés and his Spaniards acted as the unifying force for the peoples oppressed by the Mexican Empire.
Look, I haven't said this from the beginning, but when I do all that reading and everything, of course I realize that it's not really a conquest. Not in the usual sense, let's say. That is, it's the Mesoamericans themselves, the Mesoamerican peoples themselves who joined Cortés. So what happens? Well, of course, I end up having to research a lot about many of those indigenous peoples, mainly the Mexica, Totonacs, and Tlaxcaltecs, which are the 3 represented in the game. Okay, there were more, but you can't fit everything in, right? What happens is that, of course, in the end, researching all that makes you learn more and come to conclusions and so on, and you end up falling in love with those cultures too. And so, for me, that makes me see that this is, and not something else, the true richness of Hispanidad, you know? Because those peoples, look at the Mexica, they don't ally with Cortés, right? They actually stand up to him and all that. But even so, later, after the conquest, they become the stronghold of the empire. That is, the capital of New Spain is established in Tenochtitlan and it becomes known as Mexico City. And what about the great military leaders? Many of them are Mexica and Tlaxcalteca who had never been part of the same society, but now they are, right? And then they are the ones who together are going to create New Mexico, which is called Nuevo Mexico, because there are many Mexica in the troops, and together they are the ones who are going to conquer the Philippines. You know, what am I trying to say with this? Of course, in the end, inevitably, if you want to dismantle the Black Legend, you also have to talk about the indigenous people. I mean, it wasn't an exclusively Spanish feat in the sense of only people born in the Iberian Peninsula. It was people born in the Iberian Peninsula and people from Mesoamerica, and by extension, the entire Spanish Empire, with people from around the world. In addition, during the conquest of Mexico, there were people who were Africans, so it doesn't make sense to have a nationalist or racist view. In fact, it's the opposite. Hispanic identity is the complete opposite of that.
I completely agree with you, gentlemen. Just so you know, within my community, Diego Ponga and the graphic designer of the game will be coming to do an exclusive live stream for you. Everyone who joins the community through the pinned link below will have the opportunity to ask questions to the creators of this magnificent game. I want you to know that the link to buy the game directly will be pinned in the description. Diego, my brother,
congratulations on the project.
I'm delighted to have done this interview with you. It's clear that you have passion, knowledge, and above all, a strong desire to do good. And I'm convinced that you're going to crush it with this game. And I'm glad, even if just in a small way, to be able to help you reach as many people as possible.
Thank you very much for inviting me and letting me speak.
No problem, man.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for today. See you in the next episode of LA Factoria. Thank you.